and I'm gonna pop my screen up here and begin my presentation. All right, everything technically looking okay? Great. Well, like I said, thank you so much for the introduction. Really excited to be speaking to you all about beavers and riverscape restoration. And today we're talking about beaver and bison, but I'm hoping to give you a little bit of a crash course in how beavers interact with our landscape and how we can help build ecosystem resiliency in partnership with beaver. So when I left my undergraduate education, I would have very readily and confidently told you that this stream up here on the screen is a lovely, healthy mountain stream system. It's surrounded by green vegetation. We have a nice winding channel with the gravel stream bed. And while you can see some people camping in the background, any human impacts to this stream aren't necessarily really obvious. But it didn't take very long for me to have that viewpoint challenged. And in my very first job out of college, I was surveying streams just like this one all across the Pacific Northwest. And one of the streams I surveyed during this job looked a lot more like this. And it actually took me a minute to realize that I was walking in and around a beaver complex. And frankly, it was really confusing. This was not what streams were supposed to look like. How was I supposed to take any of my measurements or collect any data without a well-defined stream channel? That's what it was supposed to be. And this experience got me asking a lot of questions about what streams could or should look like. And at the time, I had no idea that the questions seated in the Pacific Northwest would follow me back to Colorado and that I'd still be trying to answer them over a decade later. So let's start with the simpler question of what do beaver do in their environment? Most of you are probably at least somewhat familiar with this since you're at this webinar. But it turns out they do a lot of things. Beavers build lodges, they store food caches, they build dams, and they even build canals throughout the landscape. They need ponds for protection from predators. They need that deep water habitat. And so they build dams to create that deep water habitat. They also dig canals to float building material to their lodge and to move around their landscape safely. And all of this activity has a lot of landscape impacts. So the impacts that beaver have on their landscape have become an important biological feedback loop that's been present in North America for at least 2.5 million years. And beaver dams and channels change the morphology of stream systems. It increases the hydrologic heterogeneity, which is just a really fancy way of saying it makes it more diverse in there. It gets colder, it gets warmer. There's just different types of water ecosystems present. And these changes connect a stream to its floodplain. And what you often end up seeing is a complex of beaver ponds and canals where water flows, but not necessarily in a single sinuous channel. And that saturated valley bottom promotes the growth and health of wetland vegetation, which in turn act as food and building resources for beaver. And thus the cycle starts over again. And this feedback loop, which is often why beaver are referred to as a keystone species, provides a lot of ecological services, and including, but not limited to, bolstering carbon sequestration, improving water quality and quantity, increasing flood, drought, and fire resiliency, improving riparian vegetation health, and supporting biodiversity as a whole. Now, back to our stream dichotomy here. The reason, or one of the reasons, that many North American streams look much more like the one on the left and a lot less like the one on the right is because in the 19th century, we had a near extirpation of beavers or a near complete removal of them due to the 19th century fur trade. And that wasn't it, though. That was followed up by almost 2 centuries of riparian land use and suppression of beaver populations. And this has resulted in many, if not most, of our natural stream wetland corridors that would have been maintained as beaver turning into incised, simplified, and dried up systems that we might not even recognize as being degraded because maybe no one alive saw them with beaver or with a robust beaver population. So what do we do about it? Well, if the diagnosis for riverscape degradation is the lack of beaver, one answer is to aid the morphological recovery of that system to facilitate the return of beaver, like this one that popped in after we had restored a segment of stream near Gunnison, Colorado. So if you're at this webinar, I know you're here to hear about beaver biomimicry, but I'm also willing to bet that most of you have heard terms like low-tech process-based restoration, beaver-based restoration, promoted recovery, stage 0, stream wetland corridor restoration, and all of these various terms that surround this type of activity, they're all a part of a larger concept called process-based restoration. And there's probably a million different terms for that as well. But I'm going to stick with what Dr. Beachy published in 2010, where he identified some main principles for process-based restoration, 4 of them. And these are to target the root cause of habitat and ecosystem change, to tailor restoration actions to local potential, to match the scale of restoration to the scale of the problem, and to be explicit about expected outcomes. And these are the guideposts that I use and that I recommend to anyone interested in pursuing a restoration project. Now, in restoration, there are a lot of tools in the toolbox, and I definitely don't have time today to go over every single tool. And I'm going to highlight a couple that are really common and that I tend to get the most questions about and that I use the most. But this is by no means a comprehensive list of what process-based restoration can look like. So first off, I'm going to talk about woody material structures. You may have heard the word PALS or post-assisted log structures. And if we're trying to get to the root of a problem, what PALS are doing is mimicking woody debris accumulation in a stream. And so these promote natural physical processes like scour, deposition, lateral erosion, and they provide some structural complexity in the stream and also a nice supply of organic material. So instead of just having water flow from point A to point B with nothing in between, you get a little bit of a change up in that flow. And that's a very simplified way of putting it, but it's also a pretty simple strategy. So sorry for the low quality of this image, but this is just one of our sites, and you can see the difference between having no woody debris in the stream and adding some. You can also see that this is pretty quick and simple to do. There's actually a couple woody debris structures in this image, and some of them are pinned down with posts, and some of them are not. And that's okay. These structures are not meant to be permanent additions to the landscape. They're meant to facilitate natural processes that will keep going even after a project is done. And the next one, which I feel as though most people here might be the most excited about, are beaver dam analogues. And beaver dam analogues, or BDAs, have turned into, I would say, a little bit of a buzzword in the restoration community. And the way I really encourage people to think about these is, again, what's the root problem that we're trying to solve? The root problem might be a lack of beaver and beaver activity on the landscape. And if that's the case, beaver dam analogues can be a really appropriate application to try to treat a reach. And so these are built of native materials. Again, they're not meant to last forever, and they're sort of meant to mimic the function of a beaver dam. Although I want to emphasize that we are absolutely no match for the beaver. And as you can see here, so this is pre-implementation. Here we actually have a series of BDAs in place. This is immediately post-restoration. And this is after beaver have come in. And you can see that they have really built up on that BDA. And that amount of material accumulation was something that we were never going to do as practitioners, and is really exciting to see. And this is another example. you can see that we as practitioners were really proud of all this hard work we did, and the beaver just came in and completely blew us out of the water. So what do these structures look like at a project scale? So this is one project that I implemented last year with a team in near Crested Butte, Colorado. And so the issues with this site were that it had a history of cattle grazing and had been heavily altered to suit that need. That included the installation of an artificial drainage ditch that had been dug to make the land more tenable for cattle. And that drainage ditch was really quickly transporting water, sediment, and nutrients out of the system. And riparian forests had also been cleared from the area over 50 years ago. And what you can't see in this is that we are in the historic floodplain of the Slate River. And I say historic, but we're still in what should be the active floodplain of the Slate River. And often along the Slate River, we get beaver colonies existing in that floodplain. So it wasn't too far of a jump to say, well, these structures could be an appropriate way to try to recover this really quickly draining area. And so after discussion with the land manager, we chose to install some structural additions like BDAs and woody debris structures that wouldn't stop the flow through the ditch, but would allow the system to naturally reaccumulate sediment while also improving the general riverscape health in the area. And so here's what it looked like on the ground. Now, this is post-restoration in October 2023 during low flow conditions. And I'm going to go a little quick because I'm running kind of short on time here. But essentially, you can see that the area of hydrologic zone of influence has been greatly increased because these structures have forced the flow over onto these banks that typically would have been flooded historically, but this incised ditch hadn't been accessing for a very long time. And there are some depressional areas that were really excellent and gave us insight to how far out that hydrologic zone of influence really was underground. And here we're just highlighting a particularly large BDA that we tied into existing landscape features. And in order to address the deforestation that had happened, we were planting willow plugs with volunteers to try to revegetate the area and use those overbank flows to get some willow stalks started. And one other example, this one was started implementation in 2021 in Taylor Park, Colorado. And I actually have a video here. So what you're gonna see is from left to right across the video, you're gonna see as we both implemented at this site and then when beaver moved in. And while I'm very proud of the work that me and several other partners did, the beaver blew us out of the water, no pun intended. And you can see after 1 year, they had built up and recolonized the area. And even over the summer months, as we started implementing phase 2 further down, they had just created this enormous dam. And what I'm really trying to emphasize here is the fact that while we can get in there and do some great work, the ultimate goal of this work is to promote natural processes, be they physical, biological, chemical, that can maintain riverscape health so that we can allow nature to chart this path of recovery and not try to design it ourselves. And that is the ultimate goal of the restoration work we're doing. And I see that as the goal of partnering with Beaver, because we can really trust them to chart the recovery of systems where it's appropriate. And I think I'm just a couple minutes over, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Or Avery, if you want to let me know how you want that to go, feel free.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allie. I have to say that seeing all those photos is a real treat. I know, like for someone like myself who doesn't get to go out in the field, I feel like seeing is really believing. So thank you for sharing all of those. Those were lovely. We did get a few questions in that we would like to share with you now, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
The first one was just, has the undergraduate education about healthy streams changed since your graduation?
I don't know if I can perfectly say the answer to that question is yes. I know some professors who do teach more in this model, there are some really excellent educational resources that are out now that were not out when I was an undergraduate. And I am seeing the landscape of this change in scientific publications. And oftentimes that can reflect how undergraduates are being taught. But I haven't been an undergraduate in some time, so I can't say for certain, but I think it's changing.
Thank you. We have a question, a sort of a three-part nestled question.
Okay.
Study areas and where you were working, are these on, were they on private or federally managed public lands?
A variety. So the one near Crested Butte is owned by a local municipality. So not quite public, not quite private. And then the one in Taylor Park is federally owned. And I think I have worked on public land owned by most federal agencies except for the National Park Service. Yet, haven't done it yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Curious, they're also curious about what is the trapping pressure in the area and are beaver protected?
So beaver in Colorado are not protected. They're under a simple fur bearer license. And there's also measures that allow private landowners to lethally remove beaver if they're causing damage to property. Beaver Institute is the #1 organization to go to if you are a private landowner having issues on private property. But they're not a highly protected species in Colorado. However, they are considered a priority species by some of our state level wetland programs. So there is a bit of a shifting attitude here. I don't see a ton of people trapping just out in wild areas. I know it happens, but as of now, I don't perceive that to be a major issue here. However, we do not have enough data in Colorado to actually stand firm on any of that. It's just assumption based on experience. Yeah, Peter?
Do the beaver just show up? Or do you have to ship them in?
That's a really good question. So here in Colorado, there is a lot of hesitation to move beaver around, largely driven by we don't want to move them too far and have communicable diseases get moved from one colony to another. So oftentimes part of selecting a restoration location is understanding what the beaver metapopulation is like in the area. And so if you're in a location where, oh my gosh, I don't see beaver for 50 miles around here, the likelihood of getting beaver to show up at that site is way lower than, for instance, the one I showed where beaver had come back quite quickly, where we all knew there were beaver upstream, downstream. I actually think, and this is one of my colleagues' hypothesis, but there were beaver, a mated pair very close by to our restoration site. And we kind of think they just moved house because we almost did like a fixer-upper for them and made something that was better suited for them than their existing location. So rather than a dispersing, kind of double yearling, we think it was a mated pair that moved in together.
Cool. Awesome presentation, I just have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well,
Great.
Peter, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to hear your side of the story now.
All right. It's a different story. Beaver just makes so much sense. It's just such a logical thing. The first time I was told about it at a conference, it just made perfect sense. So my name is Peter Byck. I'm a documentary filmmaker who then became a PI of a large research project where I got to work with some amazing scientists and amazing farm families in the Southeast US, where the question we were asking was, can adaptive multi-paddock grazing, AMP grazing, make the land better, be better for the farmers' economics, and could it possibly be a greenhouse gas sink? Could it be a solution to climate change? Not the, but a. And so we did our work in the field between 2018 and 2022 in the Southeast US. And basically, we're looking at bison as our guide. That's what the farmers who've invented or developed or evolved this kind of grazing on the shoulders of Wasson and Alan Savory and Gabe Brown and everybody. to emulate the way the bison moved across the Great Plains. And when you see that at a farm scale, this is a farm in Woodville, Mississippi, you'll see that they break their land into small paddocks with single strand electric polywire, and they'll move their animals in this pasture right here 2-3 times a day during the growing season. And then that land gets to rest for 60 days, 90 days. It just depends on what the rainfall's been, how many animals the farmers are producing. It's very adaptive. That's why the word adaptive is the first word. Then across the tree line, you have the conventional farmers who, this farm neighbor right there across the tree line in Woodville, Mississippi, they have 7 paddocks, and one of them they just hay. They don't even graze in. And then the other ones, they'll let the animals in there for 2-3 weeks at a time. And you can see that you can probably not hide a golf ball in this pasture. And so what we decided to do was to measure as many metrics as we could afford, with as many experts on our team as we could find. And so if you look at our pie here in our graphics, and these graphics are all part of a documentary that we've made about the science and the farmers and this whole experience, and it's called Roots So Deep. You can see the devil down there. And the graphics team did an amazing job for us. So we studied the greenhouse gas cycling, the birds as a wildlife indicator species, the forage, what's the nutrient density and the ground cover, bugs above and below ground, microbes, soil carbon, soil nitrogen, and water infiltration, the farmer well-being and the animal well-being. And we did this in the Southeast US, in Adolphus, Kentucky, Jasper, Tennessee, Fort Payne, Alabama, Piedmont, Alabama, and Woodville, Mississippi. And what was amazing for me in this project as the filmmaker, as well as just helping to organize, was how much time I got to spend with the farmers. And what I found in Woodville, Mississippi was the neighbors, Wallace, who'll be on the left of the scene you're about to see, who's the conventional farmer with his parents, and Cooper, who'll be on the right with a grayer hair. Cooper's the adaptive farmer with his wife, Katie. They've known each other for 25 years, yet they've never, ever talked about grazing. And so being a filmmaker and the way I do things, I said, hey, do you guys mind talking about it? And I can film it. So in this scene coming up, Wallace is having a very hard time understanding how Cooper grows the grass that he grows without nitrogen fertilizer, instead of just using the animals as fertilizer. That's what Cooper does. So here you go.
What does that make you think? Like what he's saying right there, that's not the way you work.
No, but it's, I understand it. But the thing is, I'm just saying that grass is going to grow when you put fertilizer on it. Without putting fertilizer on it, you think I'm wasting my time even planting it.
And everything you're struggling with, we've been there. So
Okay.
You can't feel or say anything that we haven't said.
Yeah.
We've been there.
It's just hard to think of how you could do this without putting it up. I'm being honest.
Yeah,
I'm telling you right now.
Yeah.
You know my dad.
Yeah.
He's as good as gold. And you telling him you don't have to spend any more. He loves that. Yeah.
But I'm telling you, Dad would eat it up. He loves the land, he loves the farm, he loves his cattle.
But you know, if you're not spending money
Yeah.
wastefully.
And that's where we are. We are not into wasting money.
So I mentioned that we studied the birds in our paper and our research, but we were really surprised by the bobwhite quail, how important that was across the farms, across the Southeast US. And so now you're going to get to meet Mike McGraw, one of our bird specialists.
Yes, bobwhite. Bobwhite. Yeah, they say their name. Bob White? Just delightful to hear that sound in the landscape. From the 90s to 2014, the bobwhite averaged approximately 5% decrease in overall population. So there's been over 85% population decrease up to 2014.
I do know this, Peter. When I was younger, they had quail everywhere. They're not there anymore.
So have you heard bobwhites while we've been here?
Yeah, I have. That when we got, right before we came on the porch, I heard that, and I kind of thought somebody was messing with me. You know, you start hearing things. But I have had one or two 10 years ago.
This year, we're hearing quail from daylight to dark, from front to back, and everywhere in between. It really makes you think. It makes you think.
So, I thought, you know, Wallace is going to change. He's got a financial situation that he's thinking about with fertilizer costs. He's got birds, bobwhite quail specifically. Those are his bird dogs. He actually goes 200, 300, 400, 500 miles away to hunt quail or just to look at quail. But when I came back a year later, he and Cooper hadn't talked about grazing again at all. Cooper doesn't want to push it. Wallace doesn't want to push it. And so they just sort of let it go. And so I realized that this idea of change is going to be harder than I anticipated. I thought we could maybe get one farmer out of our 5 pairs to look at changing and to an adaptive way of doing things. But my science team thought I was crazy. And so we, when we get the results here, we talk about nitrogen fertilizer and we talk about the costs. The adaptive side doesn't put down nitrogen fertilizer, and a lot of the conventional side does. And so this is a clip about that. Well, is a stat about that. So even though the adaptive side doesn't put down nitrogen fertilizer, they have more usable nitrogen in their soil than the conventional side, even though the conventional side does put nitrogen fertilizer down. So it's a huge cost. It's a huge expense.
Yeah, I can remember writing a check for $90,000 on this farm one year on fertilizing, and the weather not cooperate, and literally get no growth. I mean, like, no growth. And so that was when we looked at each other and we said, don't let any of us get weak-kneed again.
We never fertilized
and
again.
we never fertilized, and that's been 5 years. We never fertilized again. I just wish I had the money we had spent over the years, but, you know, we did what we thought we knew to do. That stress is totally off of us.
So self-reported from the farmers, that was $50,000 a year that the conventional farmers were spending on nitrogen fertilizer. And that was before the Ukrainian invasion. And so that number has been tripled is what I've been told. So that could be easily $150,000 a year. And then when we talk about water, Teddy Gentry, the bass player, backup singer for the country band Alabama, has a farm in Fort Payne, Alabama on one side of the fence, and his cousin, Randy Owen, the lead singer for Alabama, has his farm on the other, and they farm differently. And so we're talking to Teddy right now about water. And in our study overall, the AMP side was getting 2 more inches of rain per hour than the conventional side, averaged out across all 5 farm pairs. And what's that 2 inches look like when you add it up? Well, 1 acre inch of water is 27,000 gallons, and 2 acre inches of water is 54,000 gallons. And so if you got 1,000 acres, which a lot of these farmers do, that's 54 million gallons of water per rainfall event per hour that the AMP side's getting, soaking into their land, rebuilding the water table, versus the other side of the fence where it's washing away and potentially polluting water streams and not being very kind to beaver if there's any beaver in the area. I really want to find out if beaver can work on these farm systems. I'm very curious about that. So here's Teddy's response to that piece of information.
That's huge. I mean, that should make somebody want to change. I mean, that in itself, that in itself said, well, I mean, it's quite a difference. Wow.
So as I told you, we were measuring birds as a indicator species for wildlife health. Here's the grassland birds, the overall numbers across the 5 farm pairs. And you can see it's about 3 times the grassland birds were on one side of the fence versus the other, and literally across the fence. And then in Kentucky, the numbers were even starker. And so you can see on the Kentucky farm, it was brutal. And so here's, we get to meet the Kentucky farmers and we get to see Mike, our bird guy, again.
So it just tells the story of a functional system and one that's broken, essentially.
That's sad. That's really sad.
What makes it sad?
Well, because, I mean, you know, they don't have any place to live over there. They need a place to live. Where are they? They should be there. That's horrible. That is, it's terrible.
What do y'all think about the science that we've shared with you today? What thoughts are you having about what you've been presented?
It's showing things that I've been doing wrong for a long time. And I said, well, I've been making a mistake all these years, you know?
It's not about mistakes. It's just about, hey, this might work better. That's all it is.
What we're supposed to do now. How do we get the carbon back? How do we do this?
And so that right there is a t-shirt that we're designing with Prentice's face and how do we get the carbon back? How do we do that? Our merch stuff is going to be designed in the next month or so, and our documentary series is going to be available on our website at rootsodeep.org on May 28th. How am I doing on time? I could show you another clip, but I also want to be very conscious about time.
Give another minute.
Another minute? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So over that winter, we let these pieces of data sink in for our farmers. And then I came back in the spring and here's what happened.
What data affected you more than any other data that got you thinking, or?
Hearing that the land is unhealthy because we have not got the species of birds that should be here. That broke my heart. So I want it to be healthy, you know.
All right. You can see why I wanted to show you that clip. So the series is 4 parts. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 are meeting all the different farm families, understanding the neighbors' relationship, understanding the struggles in their lives and the challenges and things like that. And then episode 4, which I just dove into a little bit there, is when we give the data and we see if the data will have any effect. Of course, when we did this, we didn't know if the data was going to be significant or different or any of those things. And then when we shared the data with the scientists, with farmers, we didn't know if any kind of data would have any impact on whether they would want to change or not. And yeah, so that's what I got today with our time frame. Happy to answer questions. I see one right now. I'm going to just jump into Mitch. We have 9 papers published right now on our website, rootsodeep.org, under research, and then under that, published research. And we have about another 9 in the pipeline, various different stages down the pipeline. So yeah, we'll publish everything as soon as it's out.
One thing I just want to note, a question that you ruminated on in your presentation, Peter, was whether farmers can benefit from beaver. And, we actually had a webinar last month just on that topic. And there was a quote that I remember from Dallas May, who has a ranch in Southeast Colorado, saying that the biggest benefit to his farm out of everything else is beaver, and the sort of adaptive management strategies that they employ just by being beaver to sustain his farm and the well-being of him and the land. So, the idea of there being a partnership between farmers, bison and beaver, this is a cadre that I can see having sort of a lovely multi-species collaboration. So I just want to put that out there.
It just makes so much sense, right? It just makes so much sense. What I'm wondering about is will the beaver pick certain areas so that it's still easy to graze in other areas, or does it become sort of a bog, and especially the Southeast US where it rains a lot? Someone asked on the questions why we picked the Southeast. When the team got together in 2014 in January, we had 9 regions that we had selected across the US, including Hawaii, because why not? And it took so long to raise the money just for one region. So we picked the Southeast because we thought we'd see the biggest accrual of carbon in the shortest period of time. We're now in the Northern Great Plains and the Dakotas because we thought with the opposite conditions, it's a short growing season, it's cool and it's dry, versus long growing season, wet and warm. So we get two very different ecosystems. So that's what we're doing right now. We're in the midst of that.
I can't wait to hear where this takes you next. And I'm definitely going to need one of those t-shirts.
Yeah, right.
It's awesome.
But definitely everywhere I've been, the folks who are doing this type of grazing, amp grazing, mob grazing, holistic management, rotational grazing's not quite it, because you can rotate like the Fergusons were doing in Woodville. They were rotating, but it was every 2 to 3 weeks. So rotational grazing doesn't quite talk about this. Everywhere I've been where the folks have had good teachers, where they've really had good collaborators, it's worked amazing, from the Chihuahuan Desert with Alejandro Carrillo to Cornwall and Devon in the UK, where they have too much rain, way too much rain. It's really about teachers. And so someone asked about, is there financial help? I think a lot of people are looking at that. We're looking at that. Like, how can we help scale this up? Arizona State University, where I'm based, is a very open-minded university. They allowed a filmmaker to help get this research project going. And I think that if we bring scalable solutions out across the country, it makes the farmer more money almost immediately. So it's definitely an economic benefit. But I definitely think we can scale this up, and there's a lot of ways that we're looking to collaborate so that we can get that financial help, that ranch transition finance, going. And then from what I understand, farmers who focus on soil health, they pay their loans back quickly. And so then that money becomes like carbon in the system. It's just cycling, just working for other people all the time.
I know we have a number of other questions, but I'd love to see if there's a beaver to bison bridge here between and amongst you both, and just to get a quick conversation, see if there are any questions or see if any affiliations can be made in the work.
Yeah, Peter, I have a question that might lead us somewhere. And I'm having grown up in the West and I'm working in the West, it became very obvious with the way you were discussing water that the management is really different. And I think we all know that the arid West manages water very differently from the Southeast. But I kind of wanted to get a little more clarity on that, where, here we have irrigation ditches that move water around a lot. There's water rights are very complicated. I do not pretend to be an expert or understand them super well, frankly. And that's something that does come up when we're talking about beaver. People who are trying to move their water from one location to another or manage their water often have, I won't say concerns about beaver, but beaver are on their mind. And I was wondering if in all of the farms you were working on, is it just rainfall fed? Do these people have creeks flowing by? Do they have irrigation ditches? What's that infrastructure like there?
It's definitely non-irrigated land in all the studies of our research. Not that people don't use irrigation, but not in the 10 that we picked. Some of them have ponds, some have streams, but really what I've seen with the water cycle, in Saskatchewan, in California, perennial streams that were 2 generations back running all the time were dry except for in the rainy season. And then when people really focused on their soil health, those perennial streams started flowing again. It's like the more rain's going into the recharge system. And so, I understand there's huge differences in how you manage water in different parts of the country, but these sort of universal methods of heavy hit, hooves, manure, urine, eat half the forage, stomp the rest, keep the soil covered, and leave seems to work in every ecosystem that I've seen. And I talk to Alan Williams frequently, and he's seen a lot more than I have. And so it just seems like it's a good idea. And I was just thinking as you were talking, Allie, about, I live in Arizona. So when you guys in Colorado capture water, we're like, whoa, wait a second, that's our water, right? Which is insane. But if there's more water being in the cycle, there's more water. Like what I'm hearing is that the water cycle itself has been so disrupted by bare land and poorly managed land and beaverless land and bisonless land, that you're actually thinking about water in a way that's a sick system. You're seeing water that's not even accurate to what the land itself can produce. The rain is attracted to plants, right? The rain follows the plow. Remember that little sales tool in the 1870s? And so I think more water could actually be cycling through the land with beaver upstream. So it's not like I'm taking water from you. I'm actually making sure it's cleaner by the time it gets to you downstream. I'm just theorizing here, but I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something. I would agree. I mean, I know ranchers and producers out here who do, I guess you said it's not technically rotational grazing, but who do practice more, I don't know what quite the right word is, but they're not putting fertilizer down. They're moving their cattle around a lot. They're moving them around in high intensity. And they often are the types of producers who will reach out to me because they're okay with beaver being on their landscape. But there's also kind of an interesting thing that I see in Colorado that I'd be curious if you have any insight on, which is, I've worked on restoration projects that have actually had cattle actively move through them, where, we're on public land and that land has cattle leases on it. And, we are very much of the attitude that these things can absolutely coexist. It doesn't mean that there might need to be some changes to grazing management. Certainly that's the case in certain locations, but one of the project I showed at the very end there, we had cattle moving through while we were implementing. And originally we had some leasees who were really nervous about us going in and doing restoration work. And they weren't even water rights holders. They were just nervous about us being in there, putting stuff in the stream. They've been running their cattle there for generations, and we're just kind of hopping in here with this brand new idea about trying to get beaver back. And what we found was some of the super old timers remembered sometimes there being more beaver on the landscape. They'd certainly seen a bit of a roller coaster in the populations, but it wasn't foreign to them that there might be beaver there. And after 1 year of implementation and having beaver on the ground and just seeing the change in the landscape, we had grazers coming to us wanting to tell us where to go next because the next leasee wanted their stretch of stream done. And so it'd be, I don't quite know how to tie this in, but I see these two things like fitting together very nicely. And beaver do live, they should be all across North America. Just a fun fact, if anyone's curious, the largest beaver that ever existed that was part of the larger Pleistocene megafauna actually was the size of a black bear and dammed the Mississippi River. So there have been beaver in and around the Mississippi, in and around the American Southeast. And I wonder if have you encountered any attitudes about beaver in the Southeast, positive or negative?
I was ignorant of the question to ask until pretty much the last month. So I'm definitely going to keep my eyes and ears open. And, nature, I think, wants to be healthy. And when you're adding in great water engineers, that just makes sense. And bison biomimicry is what folks are calling this type of grazing. So great land managers, right? Land managers, water engineers. It just makes a lot of sense where, you got to get the prairie dogs in there and you got yourself a troika of success. But I could tell you with the grazing, like with Marie, the woman who was just crying about not having the birds on her land, she and her husband changed to amp grazing in 9 months or 10 months. They had quail on their land. She'd never heard quail before.
Wow, that's really fast.
It's really fast. And so the idea that things take forever to change, we've made a short film on a fellow named Don Jackson in our Carbon Cowboy series. It's called Givers and Takers. I was filming him 5 months in to the change that Alan Williams was teaching him. And he was seeing one of the great indicators of health is what the manure looks like on the animal. And the manure was looking great. And the coat, the sort of a greasy streak down the back of the animals. He was seeing differences just by the fact that he stopped mowing his lawn, bush hogging, let the plants grow up, attracting so many different insects he didn't even know existed on his farm. It just and then the nutrient change of the plants because they're growing up higher, just that in 5 months. And it was May, so it was only a few months into the growing season. He changed over the holidays. And so I think this stuff happens really quickly if the farmers are well instructed and dive in. Those are the two things I've noticed are the limiting factors, sort of slow steps and poor instruction. And so we as a team are like, how do we get as many teachers out there? How do we get partnerships going? How do we get this? Our goal is just to have farmers understand this as a possibility. That's it. Anyone needs to make a decision about how they're going to manage their land, right? The last thing I would want to do is tell a farmer anything. Like, and that light touch is very effective. It's very effective. It's respectful. It's respectful.
Yeah. I would say you just answered a question that I saw someone send in about, having sort of more traditionalist farmers, that a lot of times they prefer to stay with what they know as opposed to changing to a new system. But I think, like you're saying, sort of saturating the field with people who can be a resource combined with that really light touch can be really effective. And one other thing I saw come in a little while ago that I've been kind of thinking about leading up to this webinar is, the Great Plains. And I think someone mentioned interest in, someone was mentioning interest in, like Beaver Bison, the Great Plains, that kind of reconnection. And, that does seem like the obvious location for this nexus to really meet, because of course, bison were on the Great Plains in unbelievable numbers. And, trying to actually return them, I see being pretty challenging given the way land is kind of chopped up now and the way it's owned. But maybe getting bison biomimicry back on the Great Plains in combination with a higher tolerance for beaver could get us back in there.
I bet you some of the farmers that we're studying would be open to that. And just like beaver were everywhere, bison were everywhere too. I've seen theories, at least, that they were coast to coast and north to south. In the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, there's a thing called Buffalo Gap, from indigenous naming way back when. I saw a question that was asking if we're going to do follow-up docs on our farmers. What we're doing is we're just building a big library of social media right now. And so if anyone wants to track our social media, our handle is @CarbonCowboys. And that's across all the channels. And we're getting tremendous interest just in the short clips from the series that's going to come out in May, and also short little bits from Carbon Cowboys, and a lot of little bits of what people are telling us at Q&As as we're on the road with our film right now, and what people are telling us just their own experience. We've had over 38 million views since August of our shorts, and we've gained 300,000 followers. So our social media team is teaching me that I don't have to get all fancy. I don't have to have it all finished. Just get pieces of information from people quickly, subtitle it, get it up, and share it. And so that's what we're doing right now. That's the game plan right now. I know there's been hands up. Do you guys want to, Joy?
We might pop around on some questions here. I know there was some earlier in response to Ali, so we may just go around and have some disparate questions being asked. There was one asking about, are there opportunities for private landowners to host beaver restoration efforts on their land? And this person, I think, saying they have a few on their land, but they want many more nearby.
I would say definitely yes. I've absolutely done work on private land, and particularly that has come up when a private land holding has sat between within a public land stretch that we were working on, and we kind of just got the okay to do it on private land. So in that instance, we had funding available to sort of just cruise through that section. That's not always the case, but a lot of times there are different programs. The Partners for Wildlife program has been really excellent at helping to fund, private land work. So I would say check with your state and with your county and some of your federal program partners to see if anyone is interested in that. And then even groups like Beaver Institute sometimes can contribute to projects on private land. So I would say definitely yes.
Wasn't there a difference between woodlands bison and plains buffalo? Teach me. You would think that if you had a whole continent's worth of animals, that there'd be huge differences in all the different areas. We probably haven't even scratched the surface, is what I'm guessing. One of the earlier questions was whether folks have integrated this with row crop and if the row crop yields have gone up. The metric that I was taught by a guy named Jerry Hatfield, who worked at the USDA and was at Iowa State, he taught me this in 2014. He said, it's not about yield per acre, it's about profit per acre for the farmer. And so if a farmer's yields are huge, but they're in crazy debt because of all the machinery and everything else they need to get to that yield, how sustainable is that? How beneficial is that? And then when you think of what's happening to the ecosystem. And so I know that profit per acre goes up quite a bit when farmers integrate the livestock production with row crop production. I guess Gabe Brown's probably at the front end of that concept. And he and Alan Williams, I mean, they've been working with big companies like General Mills, teaching their supply chain farmers how to do that, how to get that back. Wendell Berry, I'm paraphrasing and butchering what he said, was basically what he said was, when we took livestock production and row crop production and separated them, we took an elegant solution and made two huge problems. And so I think we're just scratching the surface on what can be with restoring land, working with nature. I don't think we even know how good this can get.
And to your point there, Peter, and to that question about the difference between woodlands bison and plains buffalo, we are having a part 2 to this series just because it's such a dynamic conversation and there's so many nooks and crannies to get into. We're going to have a follow-up. Stay tuned on that, co-hosted by Indigenous led in late April. So Beaver and Bison Part 2 will be coming soon. So you'll hear about that from us in a bit. But want to continue the conversation since we have a few more minutes with any other thoughts between and amongst yourselves or from the folks who are in attendance.
I definitely want to highlight some things that have come up in the chat, because luckily some of our amazing colleagues who are in attendance have answered a question better than I was able to. And highlighting that both Nature Conservancy is interested and willing to help do process-based projects on private land. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a Partners with Fish and Wildlife program, which I colloquially refer to as the Partners program. So I'm so sorry, Carla, for butchering that. And they are willing to design, permit, and help install woody debris structures and BDAs on private land when they have willing landowners. So those are two really excellent resources if you're wanting to do that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you for all the folks in the chat sharing so much good information and recommendations for reading and further research.
Yeah. Anything else that came up?
Yeah, I'm just looking through. There's any other things we want to address before we close out. Yeah, I think this is, I think we're pretty good. We're gonna, I think, keep this at a tight hour so folks can on with their day. But just know if you have any questions or follow-ups, we're happy to connect you and to answer those. As I mentioned, next up, we're going to be hosting a part 2 to Beaver and Bison, so stay tuned for that. Some other great things to look out for on our front is we are going to be releasing the RFPs this week for BeaverCon 2024, which is going to be in Boulder, Colorado from October 20th to 23rd. It is going to be a very exciting event. So if you have thoughts or things you want to share about Beaver, we want to hear about them, and we want you to send in a proposal to us. That'll be open starting this Wednesday through May 6th. We are also building our team. We're expanding as an organization. And also this week, look out for the RFP. We are looking to hire a full-time BeaverCorps program director. So the program that Allie went through and that is growing on a continental scale with the vision to have someone within 2 hours of any beaver-human conflict or beaver restoration project that might be viable. We're hoping that that'll be the vision by 2020, is to have someone trained in this within 2 hours of any of those. And then also we have a newsletter just to stay in touch of all the activities that we have going on, from webinars to conferences and onward. Please do look at our newsletter and go ahead and sign that up. That's going to be in the chat. And last but not least, if you love what you're doing and want to see us keep doing it, please consider donating. Put that in the chat as well. And just want to close with such gratitude for Allie and Peter to coming here and being able to bring these two ideas and have them converge with each other. And I know for myself, this is going to be marinating for some time, and there's only new possibilities to build upon this. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. It's terrific to learn with you all.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you for inviting us. And yeah, thanks, Peter. That was really, really great to listen to.
And thank you to our audience for showing up and having such brilliant questions and thoughts and wisdoms to add to this exchange. So we'll see you next month with Beaver and Bison Part 2. So until then, everyone, take care.